You know who else is proud of you?
Who?
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to PixelLit. I was like, I think this might be. This might be a good one. Yes,
you almost had me.
Jesus, yeah. It was the one set of footsteps on the page in the beach because he was carrying you as you wrote it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and
he was responsible for all.
He was responsible.
Spooky story.
He gave you the coffee when you needed coffee. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
He turned his blood into wine.
Occasional back rub.
He turned his blood into wine,
which I need more frequently than most. Let's face facts.
This is my worst intro ever. Anyway, on the show today, we got John Shirley, author of Bioshock Rapture. He is on, and we spoke to him. It was a lovely conversation.
It was terrific
with a guy that has a heck of a pedigree.
Dude, this guy's resume, like he was just casually dropping people he's worked with, like William Gibson and Frank Herbert and all that stuff, and Harlan Ellison. Yeah, just this man has had a
Ursula
career.
K. Le Guin. He's,
yeah. It makes one. It really does make. I think the problem with being a writer, Kevin, and doing the interviews of the people that we interview is that these are not lazy writers. These are people who come out with a book every 4 or 5 months sometimes.
Their passion is just writing.
It is that.
They get up and they write.
That's what they do. And as we're going to find out in this interview, Mr. Shirley has been a freelance writer. That is how he has paid his bills for all of his adult life. So This guy knows his way around. He's worked for some amazing franchises, including a few of our favorites.
Mm-hmm.
It was a real pleasure to have him on.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and take a listen.
Yeah. Come on. How did I do that?
Did you get the book I sent you?
Absolutely.
I think
I love the idea, by the way. I think that's such a cool setting with the climate change setup.
Stormland.
Like that. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to reading this. It just sounds
the concept
fantastic.
is just, in a nutshell, a place in the United States where there are huge storms, hurricane level storms going 24/7, 365 days a year, for year after year, in the near future as a result of climate change extremes. So could it happen? Well, I found ways to rationalize that it could happen. Scientifically, maybe not quite so bad as I have it, but it makes a great metaphor. And that ties in kind of a parallel to Bioshock. Bioshock is an environment created to be a great metaphor for, as well as a place for adventure, of course, for the playing out of these ideas, sociological ideas. And so is Stormland. That's about the only thing they have in common. But it's my thing is set in the future, in our future, and his thing is a kind of alternate history or something.
Yeah.
But anyways, that's what Stormland is, and it's waiting. We're waiting to see if it's going to become a television series. There's interest in it.
That's fantastic.
But
that's awesome.
Apparently, Bioshock is going to become a Netflix series.
Is that so? I've heard in the past rumblings about that kind of thing.
It came out and it was announced in February that they were going that way. And Netflix takes a lot of chances, spends a lot of money. I think I could really see it being a good either mini-series or a series probably developed from like the very first days of Rapture.
Yeah.
And then you watch the thing fall apart, and then you see all the little sisters and all these other bizarre permutations come into it. And
Yeah.
I would guess they're doing something like that, but they might, on the other hand, be following the story timeline from the games, from the first and second Bioshock.
Right.
Yeah, because
I'm really into watching it. I'm going to try it out. I think it would make a fabulous looking thing, you know.
It would be gorgeous.
Or television.
The neon and the Art Deco and all
and just all the world outside, and there's just so much you could do with it.
It's a very claustrophobic
to play with.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Well, let's start from the beginning then. We know of your resume, and we hope that our audience does too. But just in case, tell us about your early work. Where'd you begin?
Well, I probably first started publishing in underground publications in the 70s. This was the Vietnam War and everything, and we were all reacting to it. And I put my first fiction in some of these things that were little allegorical set pieces, and also nonfiction pieces. And I published a magazine of my own, and it was just obscure stuff, you know. There was a whole culture of these long before the internet. We just did everything by the mail and sometimes through head shops. You're ask your parents what head shops are if you don't know. But, they're shops where hippies went to buy paraphernalia. And they're the fathers of our contemporary places where people, buy weird designer drugs and
sure.
And just elaborate glass pipes and so on. But in those days, they also had underground magazines and newspapers. And so then I started out getting confidence there. And I went to the Clarion Writers Workshop. And my teachers were people like Frank Herbert, who was the creator of Dune, the novelist who wrote Dune. And he mentioned that he had in fact taken magic mushrooms, and that did influence some of his creation of the Bene Gesserit. And he was there, and Ursula Le Guin was there.
Oh wow!
And Harlan Ellison was there, and Robert Silverberg. These are all well-known people in science fiction and fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some editors, and it was just a great environment for 6 weeks. Every week you had a different teacher. So you would submit stories, and Frank Herbert would read your story, and Harlan Ellison would read your story. And then they and the other students would all kind of workshop it. And that was a big growing thing for me. And that's where I learned to be tough. But I also got a lot of encouragement from them. Ellison helped get me published. And
I can only imagine that if you're going to get tough under any writer, it would have to be Harlan Ellison.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, I mean, he could be. He did encourage me. He sent one of my stories to an anthology editor, and the guy took it. And that was my first paying genre publication. And I was after that, I started submitting novels, and I sold paperback novels. And I only had jobs for a short time in my adult life. I was a typist at a newspaper and did some stuff like that. And I went to a few years of college and worked around the college. But I mostly have been a freelance writer for all of my adult life, and in television and in books and movies. I wrote The Crow, right? So, whenever there's a sequel to that, I get paid. And I wrote a lot of books adapting franchises, like Bioshock. I wrote that, and that was followed up by Borderlands books based on that video game. I wrote 3 of those. Those sold pretty well. And Bioshock is actually probably my best-selling thing. It really has sold well, and still in print and around the world, Bioshock Rapture.
Yeah.
I have a novel called Demons that sold very well, and it's about giant demons invading the earth, and how do you deal with that? And it's still around, and that also was optioned by Dimension Pictures, and they had a script and a director, and then the recession came, and they blew off about 75% of their projects. They paid me fairly well already, but so that came close to being a movie. But there are still people who want to make a movie out of Demons, and it might happen.
That's awesome.
So, anyway, went to Clarion, wrote a lot of paperbacks, and then I made connections with a really good Hollywood agent, because I'm the one who found the comic book, The Crow. And I was going to write something kind of like that. And then the Caliber Comics said, no, we've got one that's a little too much like that. So I bought the comic at the store, and I said, this looks like a movie. And I took it to a young would-be producer who happened to have a friend who knew Edward R. Pressman, a famous producer, and he liked the pitch on it, but especially he liked the comic books because it looked like a movie. It's like storyboards. Right.
It's already storyboarded.
James O'Barr, who created The Crow, was very into movies, and he's a very cinematic comic artist. So we were able to work a deal with O'Barr and set it up over there. And I wrote the first 4 drafts of that, and I share credit with Dave Scow. And that led to my getting agents, and I worked in television. I worked in Deep Space Nine and various other fantasy and horror things, like a Poltergeist TV show and so on.
Right.
I wrote scripts for those, and I wrote a lot of animation. I even sometimes still write some animation. Like a few years ago, I was still in my spare time writing for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the CGI version.
Right. Yeah.
We got an Emmy nomination, but we lost to Bob's Burgers.
Well,
I'm sure they deserved it more than we did, but it was fun to work on that. And so awesome. I've done all that stuff, and I wrote a cyberpunk trilogy. I wrote a lot of cyberpunk science fiction, and I was one of the original cyberpunk writers with William Gibson and Bruce Sterling.
Sure,
there's a big TV show coming up adapting Gibson's novel, The Peripheral.
Really?
They've tried to do Neuromancer. They couldn't get that set up, but the Peripheral is happening. So check that out, because that is real cyberpunk. Now, a lot of these websites and people who think they know about cyberpunk, well, it's actually just some comic book you read. But that's okay. That's fun stuff too. But if you want to see the real thing, you should watch The Peripheral when that comes on. I forget what channel is doing it at this second. Was it Amazon? I think it's Amazon. Nice. But so Gibson and I collaborated on stories and scripts, and the scripts didn't get made, although we got paid for them. And we collaborated on a story that was in his story collection. And I worked with Bruce Sterling and Rudy Rucker and other cyberpunk writers. And those connections led me to being a sort of consultant for different things. That's why they should have hired me for Cyberpunk 2077.
Yes.
Yeah. It's an okay game, and a little glitchy, but it's okay. And I think they should have hired one of the original Cyberpunk writers.
I agree 100%.
Yeah, but so I've written many novels, of my own, that are just John Shirley novels. Including the Song Called Youth Cyberpunk trilogy, which is still in print from Dover. But there was a whole long period there after I moved away from Hollywood, when I was looking to keep the cash flowing more, and I got offers to write adaptations. And for series, I wrote one for the Grimm television series,
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote a Aliens versus Predators book and an Aliens book and a Predator book.
That's right up Phil's alley.
Yeah, you're talking about my favorite franchise.
And a Batman novel, and a bunch of video game related things. So that led to Bioshock Rapture.
Yeah.
And that's what we're here to talk about mostly, I guess.
Well,
yeah. I think we've got room for plenty, though. I mean, you've had such a varied career. I think we would be remiss if we didn't bring some stuff up there.
I do a lot of stuff. I write songs for the Blue Oyster Cult. If you know that band, your dad knows it.
Oh, we know.
Don't Fear the Reaper. And
absolutely.
Don't Fear the Reaper.
I didn't write that song, but I've written a lot of songs they recorded. They have a new album called The Symbol Remains. It's their first studio album in 20 years. And I wrote the 5 songs on it, including the singles. And it's doing really well. And it's just a really good
That's
album.
Awesome. Yeah.
There's a song on it called The Alchemist, which I didn't write, but it's a great song if you love H.P. Lovecraft, because it's based on an H.P. Lovecraft story. But the album is called The Symbol Remains. You can hear the whole album free on YouTube.
That's awesome. We'll have to check it out. One of the things you mentioned actually kind of reminded me a little bit of something John Carpenter has said when you were talking about the sequels to whenever they make a sequel to it or what have you, you still get a check. And John Carpenter has said the same thing with Halloween, where somebody asked him, like, so what do you think of the new Halloween movies? And he said, every time they make one, I open my mailbox and there's a big check in it.
So he likes it.
So he likes
those new movies. For that, that's the upside, and I don't blame him for basically adhering to that. That's how I feel about the Crow sequels too.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. So, what was the process like for? So, since you've done a bunch of novelizations from video game, film, was there anything different in doing a adaptation of a comic book to a screenplay that you would say that you felt?
You mean in adapting like Bioshock Rapture to a novel?
Yeah.
You're comparing that to doing a screenplay?
Sure. Adapting a comic book to a screenplay. Yeah.
Well, pretty different.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost the opposite. It's like the inverse, because you're sort of working from scripts when you adapt a video game, because they are scripted. Yep. Not the sets, the scenes, the set pieces, the cut scenes are scripted, but also there's in a game like Bioshock, very elaborate story and plot. And it can be experienced from different angles, which is one of Levine's fascinations. He likes to give you lots of choices and experience things from different places. I think he had a lot to do with the development of the popularity of these big playground style games that we have now, these big sandboxes. Yeah. But even when you go off on one branch or another, those are scripted too, and they did give me some of the scripts for things, and they gave me a lot of material to go with, as well as, of course, I played the game. There was a kind of Bible of the game, and when you are adapting something, you always want that Bible. Of course, you don't want to run afoul of their canons. You want to be faithful to these basics that are part of the franchise, that are, so that you're not contradicting the game. Even though in any adaptation I do, there's room for a lot of creativity and fleshing out. I did some movies. Like I did a novelization of the movie about Doom, speaking of video games, and one for the movie Constantine, the Keanu Reeves film. And I was there. The scripts left a lot of unanswered questions, so I was able to to answer those questions and to fill out all those things that hadn't been offered in the movie. And they'll let you do that up to a point. Although if they're thinking of sequels, they're very careful that you don't step on anything. And sometimes they might even, I can't think of an example right now, but sometimes they might take something from your novelization and use it in a sequel, which is okay because they're buying all rights for that. It's their property, essentially. It's entirely their property. Usually the writer gets paid only a flat fee rather than royalties for these things. Right. So that's just something you accept, and but they give you a good flat fee. So you go along with that, and one gig leads to another. So it is kind of like the inverse of adapting a script to a novel, for example. It's more, or a novel to a script or anything like that. It's more like being, working. It has a lot in common with working with television or movies, because there's this sort of committee environment where you have to have meetings with groups of people. At the time, they were phone meetings. Usually, sometimes if you're around, you can go in person. But usually, I never met Ken Levine. We just talked on the phone. Right. So there's that feeling about it, like you're almost developing something, like developing a movie, except it's a novel. Sure. And there's a lot of tension between my creativity, which is, I love to bring something more to one of these projects. And of course the rules and the parameters set down by the people who created the game. Right. And there's a lot of back and forth, and like, I'm looking to see how far I can go with adding something of my own, and then I'm getting reined in, and but and you get the same feeling when you're working in a television series, for example. You're constantly trying to find a place for your own expression within the context of the TV series canon.
Yeah, that's funny because it's the same thing that Bill Dietz told us when he was writing one of the Halo books for Bungie. They wanted him to just basically write the game, and he basically said, "No, I gotta put something else in here. It can't just be beat for beat the game. I gotta inject something else." And he eventually was able to add some interstitial plot elements that aren't in the game at all. But yeah, I totally understand that.
I wrote a Halo novel called Broken Circle.
That's right. Yeah, you did. We're going to be getting to that one.
We'll be getting to it eventually, because we're working through all the Halo books.
So that one was different. I'll just mention briefly from the other ones. I think it's distinct from the other ones. I haven't read them all. I read a couple of them, but in that, it is from the point of view of aliens, and the hero of the other Halo novels is just kind of a legend on the periphery, never enters into it. There's no human point of view in Halo Broken Circle at all, and that wasn't my preference. It was their idea that I do that. I knew it would be harder because there's not that much established about some of these alien civilizations, like their culture, for example, and how they relate to one another. So I had to work closely with them and experiment to find things that would work, but eventually it turned into into a really good creative experience where I got to be very imaginative about it. So my Halo novel was a little different.
Yes,
to say the least.
To say the least.
And maybe, I'm pretty alienated, so maybe I was the right guy to do the alien.
Now, what about when it comes to writing for an animated series versus a live action series? Do you find that there's a lot of difference there? I mean, you can do more with an animated series, right? Or would you find that it's
in some ways more, in some ways less? I mean, there's not really a special effects budget in an animated series exactly that you have to think about. I mean, if you're writing a science fiction series, you have to think about, well, how much would that cost?
Yeah.
Right? Do they have to build a model? Do they have to spend a lot on CGI for this? With animation, they just have this flat out budget and they can do a whole lot. There's in some animation programs, there are rules against having people running at the camera. There's some animation problem with that, and then a few other things like that. I've forgotten a lot of them, but I think they got over that now with CGI animation. But there, it's on the other hand, with live action, you can usually get a grittier, and there is now some pretty gritty and raunchy animation out there.
Yeah,
and,
sure.
There's plans for a new show. I'm not allowed to say. I might be writing it, but I'm not allowed to say yet. Because it's
right up against that NDA wall.
It is right, exactly. The NDA wall, yes. NDA wall, yes. Non-disclosure, but it's based on a Philip Dick novel, and so it's pretty raunchy and gritty. But that's some of that is beginning to happen more and more in animation. There's a new TV show. Ooh, what's the name of it? It's about it just started recently, and and maybe you guys know it's about like fighting elves and stuff. Tough fighting elves, and they're always cussing, and
tough fighting elves.
There's a lot of sexual implication and so on, and I believe it's
Phil. That really sounds right up your alley.
I don't know what this is, but I automatically love it just based on that description.
You're rubbing my nose because of the pollen. That's why I'm sniffling and rubbing my nose. We're having a wave
sure it is, John. Sure it is.
So I may even sneeze. So be prepared for that. I may have to wipe off the screen here after I react to the pollen. But so you can do most of the time, especially with television animation on the networks. You have to be kind of a little bit PG at most rated. And that affects what you can write.
Sure.
And also it's kind of adult concepts, just even intellectually adult concepts seem harder to get across in a lot of television animation, in my experience, not counting something like Adult Swim. I mean their animation.
Yeah.
Right. That's a whole nother category.
That's a whole different
thing that I wrote, which is like, I wrote an Iron Man armored adventures that's aimed at teenagers.
Right.
And, so there were a lot of rules about how involved you could get in ideas, because there wasn't that much time to put them across, and you can't have a lot of talking heads explaining things. So these are all considerations.
Yeah. That reminds me of what was it? There was that Sony Marvel agreement that just got leaked, where all of the there's basically all these considerations that Sony must abide by in the treatment of Spider-Man. Like Peter Parker cannot do this, he cannot do that, he cannot do this. He can do this, but only if he is wearing the black symbiote suit.
Right. You have to know that stuff. You have to, every time you have one of these jobs, whether it's whatever you're adapting, whatever world you're adapting, you have to know all that. I did one short story for Dungeons and Dragons when they were doing a Dungeons and Dragons short story anthology. They sent me a pile of Dungeons and Dragons books like this, and I had to pour through them to try and get things right and get the feel right, because I had never played Dungeons and Dragons anyway. And they were very, definite about what they wanted, and they all are. Yes, you have to know who has what powers and what technology is used, and whether or not they may possibly be the unknown love child of Thor or whatever.
Right.
You got to be careful of all these things, and they expect you to know them. So there's a learning curve for a writer for each of these projects.
Right.
Even if you think you know it. I thought I knew the Alien series pretty well. But there was a lot of stuff that I still had to learn in order to not run afoul of these kinds of, other little precepts and canonical understandings.
Yeah. Canon is...
Especially nowadays with fans on the internet, they'll let you know.
Canon is wild.
That's true. Yeah. It's hard to escape.
Now, one of the things we did talk a lot about when we were going through Bioshock Rapture was Ayn Rand. I myself am a former card-carrying objectivist, and then I wised up quite a bit. A woman was involved.
Right, and that's right. That's why this is one of the reasons why we need women.
Absolutely. So, and one of the things, and I kept, as we were reading through it and talking about it and everything like that, it just became constant moments of me going, okay, all right. So in Atlas Shrugged, they talk about this, and I feel like, and there would be these parallels. How much experience do you yourself have with Ayn Rand's work? Did you actually read those?
I read her first thing, which was the title of which I forget, which was one of her thinner books. I have not read Atlas Shrugged, but I went and read articles that explained her ideas.
Yeah.
And of course she has, and people into that have had a sort of watershed effect on aspects of our culture, our political culture, especially in recent years.
Yeah.
People like Rand Paul, and who's Rand Paul named after?
Yeah,
right.
So, and his dad, both Ayn Randians, and they make policy to try and fit within that philosophy. And the problem, of course, for me, who is a person who loves nature and animals, and who likes to have clean air and clean water, for some perverse reason. That the problem for me is with these philosophies is that they don't like regulations. People, objectivists and libertarians fight regulations, and Rand Paul fights regulations, and until we started having environmental regulations, we were having just catastrophic effects in our environment. Now we're still having problems, but some aspects are better because of the regulations we do have. I mean, of course, anything can be over-regulated. And, in Bioshock 2, they kind of touch on the way you can overreach when you're trying to socially engineer.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And of course you can. I mean, look at Stalin and so on. These are people in Mao Zedong. These are people that they like to cite, and they like to say, and so Barack Obama is just like Mao Zedong.
Yeah.
Right.
And, yeah, right, buddy.
What?
Not at all. But that's like saying, it's like saying the Sahara Desert is just like a warm day in Indiana.
Right. It's fine.
These are extremes of one
not
of the
really
places
comparable.
The other is an extreme. Okay.
Yeah.
And
These are the
really,
same.
Despite what they say, most Democrats have no real socialism about them. You know, and the funny thing is, a lot of people who really believe in this stuff and who are the older people all get Social Security, which actually is kind of socialist.
Yeah.
It isn't some kind of crazy extreme socialism. It's just government
socialism
trying to help elderly people not die of starvation.
And God help you if you suggest the idea of taking it away. They'll be
what are you
come out in
talking about?
droves to
I'm
vote
getting
against you.
my grandma gets it. So all of a sudden they're arguing for it, you know, and the same with Medicare. And so there are the purest Ayn Randians and libertarians would theoretically like to get rid of Social Security and Medicare. And they just say, you know, the market will fix everything. The free market fixes everything. But history hasn't shown that to be the case.
No.
So
historically, never the case.
So what we learned from when we see these things caricatured in Bioshock, as is my theme here, is that there is a sweet spot between extremes.
Sure.
Right.
And where you can use ideas of community, strong ideas of community, and a strong respect for freedom and for enterprise too, even free enterprise, regulated free enterprise. Even a football games, very competitive, have rules, right?
Yeah,
it's like that.
Exactly.
So there's a place for both sides in an intelligently run society, which we may accomplish someday. We may come up with one.
Fingers crossed.
And
fingers crossed.
We've had very little. Had approaches to it anyway. There's a place for freedom, lots of freedom, and lots of community, and some basically cushions for people when they need to reboot their lives and start over, for example. There's a place for all those things in an intelligent society. Bioshock shows us what happens when you drop one or the other summarily.
Yeah.
Right.
And things get nuts.
Yes,
a little bit.
A little bit nutty.
Now, you mentioned before that you've played Cyberpunk 2077. You clearly you're a gamer. What are you working on these days? You playing anything in particular?
What game am I playing?
What are you playing?
I was thinking of. Well, I played all the Halo games. I enjoy them. Some more than others. I was thinking of playing Halo Infinite. But then I read about it. It just seemed like it might be just kind of a lame interstellar version of what's the game I'm thinking of? Where this
Far Cry.
Far Cry. Sorry, I'm going to turn up my volume.
they like their drugs in Far Cry. I always thought that was
right. Far Cry is the one.
Far Cry was always it always made me think of it was like an action game told by Hunter S. Thompson. It just felt very.
I did write a novel for that company, but for something else entirely.
Oh, nice. Well, that actually brings me to the next question. You've worked on so many franchises, some really legendary franchises. Is there one that you haven't worked on that you'd really love to try out?
Well, man, I'd love to. I'd like to help develop a video game.
That would be awesome.
Like to develop, if there's a sequel to the Cyberpunk 2077, I would honestly like to work helping them develop stories, just as a consultant, probably.
Yeah.
But and I wouldn't mind writing a novel based on that because I'm qualified, certainly, but also they do give you a lot of room to maneuver, and that would be great, actually. I kind of enjoyed that. I think I wouldn't mind doing another Bioshock novel, maybe if the right opportunity came along, because there are going to be other Bioshock games. Levine stopped developing them. He has quit, but there are going to be more games, and I don't know exactly what stage they're in.
Right.
I wouldn't mind writing another Bioshock novel because I have a pretty good feel for that environment, and it's just so fun.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
characters like, I think, Dr. Steinman.
Yeah. He is such a wild character.
Such a fun character. I really liked working with that because he's insane.
Yes.
And so not a stretch for me. And well, no, I'm in punk rock bands, but I'm not really insane. But if you see me on stage, you'll think he's insane.
Sure.
But in literature, I just find harmless ways to act out.
Yeah.
And I was able to do it through J.S. Steinman, the mad plastic surgeon, right?
Right.
Oh yes.
And just the whole concept of a mad plastic surgeon. I've had that idea myself in the past, and I thought now's my chance to really play with that. And also, there's something that comes up in these Bioshock games that I think I'm not sure if Levine ever referenced it or not, but I think he might be having some influence from Edgar Allan Poe.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Like if you think of a certain classic Edgar Allan Poe stories like The Black Cat, and The Telltale Heart, one of the things Poe specialized in was getting really deeply into a mad subjectivity. You know, like you're really so rooted in the mind of a madman that you can see the madman's own personal logic. And how he's sort of trapping himself with this insane logic. And you see that in characters in Bioshock when they're like getting into very extreme states, or they're on drugs, and they've been altered mechanically and they go nutty from it. And also even Ryan gets, I think he becomes crazy eventually.
Definitely. He gets paranoid to the extreme.
Yes, he's very paranoid. And so Levine explores that. And explored that in Steinman. And I've always loved Poe, and I was able to kind of riff on that and explore that myself with him. And I got very into Ryan's character because I did some research, and I kind of understand how these people think, people with that philosophy. Yeah, I should have studied you, but I didn't know, Phil.
It's okay.
It's an
honest mistake
when you were at your worst and taking note.
If only you'd known me when I was in my 20s, John.
Yeah, that's the 20s. It's very much a young man thing for the most part, and then people start getting a little maturity, and they start thinking, maybe we should think about other people after all.
Yeah.
I think
also they want to get laid.
Yeah.
Well, that was a big part of it. I'm not going to lie to you. No, but a big thing for me is when you're at that point, it's real good. That objectivism is real good for people who think that they're geniuses. And I find that most people, the older they get, no matter how successful they are, they start to realize, I might not be a genius. And that's all very eye of the beholder there.
Yeah, because there's a certain megalomania in objectivism, because it's the idea that the individual rules. And you really see it in John Gant. What's the name of the character?
John Galt.
John Galt.
Yeah.
I read at that, and I read about him, and those megalomaniacal people. Look at Elon Musk. I think is a libertarian. I don't know if he said so or not, but
but he's 100%. Yeah.
He walks and talks like that particular
is
duck.
anybody a more megalomaniacal than Elon Musk? I mean, he really wants to do everything his way, and he'll let the chips fall wherever. Like when he sprayed thousands of satellites into the sky without really getting it cleared with all the companies, the countries of the world.
Yeah.
He did that, and it's creating problems as people predicted it would. It has some uses, of course, but a lot of technology that has uses is also problematic. It's not moderated and thought through.
Astronomers basically said Elon Musk's little Starlink program is messing with their work.
Yes, and it's messing with the night sky for just the naked eye, but astronomers are really having problems with it. Yes, it's getting in the way, and it's creating more space junk. And which is already a huge problem. Yeah. So, that, and to me, Musk is not in his 20s, but he seems like in what we used to call an arrested adolescent, or a person arrested in adolescence.
Yes. 100% arrested development for Elon Musk.
I like that he was able to get spaceships to land on their tails, because I grew up with that golden age science fiction idea, and I dig that part.
That's a classic.
He also, kind of pushed his cars out there rather hastily, and they had this thing where they catch on fire.
Yeah, the one thing you don't want a car to do.
Picky.
And he dug that tunnel that a car can fit through.
Yes.
Because
that tunnel is kind of a good idea, but you can't you actually have to get permission for giant projects like that.
Right.
He's sort of like a Robert Heinlein character.
Heinlein. It really is.
Heinlein is all. He's a lot like that.
Yeah.
Oh, he's definitely got some Heinlein in him, no question. No. Okay. All right. We're starting to wrap up here. So, John, we got to ask the important question, the big question. Tell us about your music.
I was in a lot of bands, and I recorded I was on a label in New York City, and I played at CBGB, and then I was in, after punk rock bands, I was in funk bands, what we called modern funk, or futuristic like funk. We called it sometimes.
George Clinton kind of stuff?
Kind of like Talking Heads, and certain things by Bowie. And at least in my dreams, it was like that. We played in clubs around New York, and I never gave it up. And I always wrote songs for other people. I've written songs for Blue Coupe, which has people from the Alice Cooper band, and I've written a lot for the Blue Oyster Cult, and I write for just various little bands here and there, and I have my own band, the Screaming Geezers, which screaminggeezers.com. You can hear two samples there. And we're going to play at a place called Dante's in Portland pretty soon on May 29th. So I'm still doing that stuff. I'm the front man, and I opened for the Blue Oyster Cult at a big theater called the Roseland in Portland. 1,500 people packed the place, and
that's awesome.
We rocked it. They loved us, and it was a great experience.
Let's tell Lee.
The biggest place I ever played. I usually play in nightclubs.
That's fantastic. All right. Well, what are you? Before we let you go, is there anything you want to plug? Anything you're working on in particular right now?
Well, my latest thing is to write a trilogy of westerns.
Ooh.
Oh, okay.
So maybe I should work on Red Dead Redemption or something. But
yeah, that'll get you in the mood. So at the very least,
I have played the first one. I don't like third-person games that much, and I was able to switch it. You can switch it so it's first person.
Yeah.
But I played Red Dead Redemption. But this. I've always wanted to write westerns that had kind of a feel like Larry McMurtry, like Lonesome Dove, like Sam Peckinpah movies, where you get this earthy feel of the frontier at its most combative. And so I wrote one called Wyatt in Wichita, about Wyatt Earp as a young man in Wichita that's out there. And I'm going to have one called Axel Bust Creek, about a mining town. It's coming out from Kensington. It's this company that, like, when you go to supermarkets and you see the Western novels and the little slots in the book section of the supermarket, they do all of those.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm writing a trilogy of those, and I'm hoping to make it into the basis of a movie at some point too.
No, that's cool.
I've written a fantasy novel called A Sorcerer of Atlantis that is out, and I have that Sorcerer of Atlantis. I'll just mention is a real sword and sorcery thing. It's like if you like Conan, sort of like that, but with a little more sense of humor, and also explore what Atlantis might have really been like.
Right.
And then there's the possibility of a sequel for Stormland. Stormland is my big novel out there right now, and I have some scripts that are being submitted here and there. So we'll see if anything happens with those. It's a horror script based on my story, The Rubber Smile. It has to do with discovering that an imaginary in my book series of psycho killer movies were actually not fiction.
Oh wow! Oh, I love it.
That's cool.
Yeah, I figured you had some horror in you based on what I read with Dr. Steinman.
I won the Bram Stoker Award from the horror
right,
writers.
exactly.
Right. Yeah, you got some horror chops.
I never miss a chance to mention that casually. I won the Bram Stoker Award.
I wouldn't either.
It's for my story collection, Black Butterflies.
Yeah.
I've got 10 story collections out there, by the way. I have a new one that just came out called The Feverish Stars. And it's a mix of dark horror and dark science fiction.
Cool.
Love it.
That's awesome.
So that's his plug-a-rolla, man. I just plugged the hell out of it.
That's great.
We love it. We love plugs.
Yeah, they're our favorites. Thank you so much for coming on and joining us, John. We really appreciate this.
All right. Well, it's been fun. Thanks for having me.
Wow, Phil. What a conversation that we had an hour ago.
Yeah. That was.
You want me to take that one from the top, or let's just keep rolling?
No, leave it alone. God damn it.
Leave it alone.
Fuck it. We're doing it live. It was perfect. Every moment of it was perfect, Kevin.
Every syllable that came out of your mouth.
Don't you dare doubt yourself.
No, that was very fun. John, sir, he's a real sweetheart. And glad we got to know him for that hour. Phil, any closing thoughts before we start plugging our socials?
I think I need to write more.
Yeah, that's the one thing that I've learned when interviewing authors. They are authors because they author.
Yes. Who'd have thunk it, right?
Who'd have thunk it? They are very intent on writing things.
That was possibly the most prolific plug section of any interview we've ever done. Because that man works. That man friggin' works.
He writes. Just imagine if we ever interviewed Stephen King, his plug section would last as long as the podcast.
Stephen King, we're here for you, man.
We're here for you, man. So if you're interested in getting witty insights such as these in your ear balls, your ear balls, yeah.
That magical part of the anatomy.
That magical part of the anatomy where sound is received. Go ahead and give us a follow. Follow our podcast. Give us 5 stars. Type up, author a little review for us. Practice your writing by writing us a 5-star review.
Yeah.
That would be...
Have fun with it, guys.
That would be
Come
fancy. Share us on social media, your Twitters, your Facebooks. If you're feeling spicy, your LinkedIn's.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Put us in LinkedIn.
Someone in LinkedIn. Do that. Why not? Just
why not?
I'm sure there's a CEO, a high-powered Wall Street CEO listening to us who has like 1 million followers because he writes LinkedIn posts 1 sentence at a time, as you do on LinkedIn.
Exactly.
Anyway, I'm feeling punchy tonight.
Yeah. Get that little shot in the arm.
Little loosey-goosey. Follow us on Twitter at PixelLit Pod, same as on Instagram PixelLit Pod. You can find our website, pixelitpod.com, where we post all of our episodes. And any time that we have had a guest appearance, you can find it on there as well. You can join our Discord through the website, all that fun stuff. So, that'll about do it. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.